The 14th round of the 2003 Champ Car season took place in Diet, France, Quebec, Canada. We're racing in Montreal to be more precise, at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Heading into the race, the big storyline was the most exciting qualifying session of the year. It was Montreal native Alex Tagliani taking a shock pole position, with another shock front row sitter of Oriol Servia starting alongside. Meanwhile, for third place starter Bruno Junqueira, it was a rocky weekend. He had some more scuffles with Oriol Servia throughout the weekend, compounding what happened in Mid-Ohio. As for his relationship with the pole, I feel the need to draw attention to this. Now, I'm fairly well versed on racing driver excuses. I've been watching racing for over 14 years now. I was a driver myself for a decade, and I've been covering racing in a more in-depth manner for years as well. I know a bad racing driver's excuse when I see one, and what you're about to hear is the worst I've ever heard. And keep in mind, this is coming from a man who once said 6 years ago that the reason he was struggling for speed on an electric go-kart track was because of a misfire. After qualifying, Bruno Junqueira said that the reason he missed out on the pole was because the track changed the location of the porta potties overnight, meaning he couldn't locate them before the start of the session, couldn't relieve himself, and was thus heavier. I know I'm meant to keep the element of surprise going, but this is why Bruno Junqueira is not an IndyCar champion. Paul Tracy would start in a very disappointing 8th, having battled a very unstable car all weekend. Jeff Boss would be your 19th and last place starter, being the only driver whose best qualifying time was north of the 1:22 barrier. One big problem was made apparent before the start, and that would be fuel. And this was meant to not be an issue all year long thanks to the mandated pit windows. However, this weekend a pit stop was mandated every 20 laps, but the whole field was struggling to get that far. Because of this, fuel saving would be a big part of the race. The one part of racing strategy that people don't like is the only one to rear its head this season. God damn it. With all of that taken care of, we can get to the start of the race. The green flag would fly, and with a good start, it was Alex Tagliani staying ahead of Oriol Servia and taking the early lead. Meanwhile, the comms crew was silent for some reason. Seriously, they didn't say anything until the turn 8-9 chicane on the back end of the track. I'm not sure if they had some kind of technical issue or what, but they were just silent. Darren Manning, meanwhile, certainly wasn't very silent as he got hit by Mario Dominguez. There were some more sound-related dramas. In the early stage, the only action was a collective sound of people banging their heads on the closest wall. The whole field was saving fuel, and it was pretty painful to watch. But thankfully, the fuel wouldn't be an issue for much longer. Ryan Hunter-Reay was stopped in the hairpin, and the yellow had to come out to retrieve the car. Thanks to this, the field's worry of making it to the first pit window were wiped away. There were even some pit stops farther towards the back, but after I received a phone call while writing this part of the video, I couldn't remember anything of note from those pit stops. The race would be restarted, and while Bruno Junqueira spun out third position, and Mario Dominguez tried a kamikaze mission on Sebastian Bourdais, the field was setting up for the first pit stops. First it was Alex Tagliani coming in, followed a lap later by everyone else. Despite the early stop being played off as a detriment, it worked for Tagliani as he would rejoin with the lead and not lose out to Oriol Servia. Roberto Moreno and Adrian Fernandez, who had pitted during the Ryan Hunter-Reay yellow, were up towards the front, slotting into second and third as Servia dropped back. Servia was really struggling, losing fourth to Michel Jourdain Jr. After that, this race started to feel like it had turned into Groundhog Day, as Mario Dominguez and Sebastian Bourdais nearly killed themselves again at the chicane. Shortly after that, Bourdais got word that he needed to let Dominguez by after a pit road infraction. Then right after he let Mario by, he began complaining of gearbox issues. Sebastian would pit at the end of the lap and then retire from the race. Around the same time, we nearly had a Forsyth aside at the hairpin, as Tracy overcooked it badly and nearly rear-ended his teammate. We got a bit of TMZ after this too, as Speed Channel focused on Mika Salo in the PK Racing pits, and also mentioned how he had not only tested for the team, but had his name on the side of the car when it arrived in Montreal. Now, I'm not saying anything other than that, but what I am saying is stay tuned for next week. As the next series of pit stops neared, Alex Tagliani was really struggling. He just couldn't save fuel, so once again he'd have to pit early, coming in on lap 38. The rest of the front field responded 2 laps later, and while the pit stops were the same time, it was very close between Tagliani and Jourdain, with Tags retaining the lead just barely over his adversary. Things were getting weird. The threesome at the hairpin between Fernandez, Moreno, and Dominguez was good enough proof of that. But as things got weird, they also got miserable for Bruno Junqueira. He was once again around in the hairpin, but this time he stalled it too. With the Brazilian's car stationary, the yellow was back out. The restart came on lap 49, and besides Jeff Boss getting his metaphorical doors blown off, it was clean, briefly. Tiago Monteiro, who already had a black flag, came barely barreling into the hairpin with his rears locked up, going way too quickly, cleaning out Ryan Hunter-Reay and breaking his left front suspension. The yellow was back at. These yellows were helping Alex Tagliani on fuel, but he still needed to pull a big gap. The gap he was looking for was about 6 seconds, and he only had 6 laps to pull it off. Unfortunately for Tagliani, he just couldn't pull away. The gap was lingering around a second and a half when he pulled into the box at the end of lap 58. He came in, and now it was Jourdain in the lead for 2 laps before he came in as well. When Jourdain pulled in, it gave the lead to Roberto Moreno, but the attention was on the battle with Michel and Tags. Jourdain's stop was well quicker, and he rejoined the track with a net lead of the race. After this, Tagliani was buried mentally, and the mistakes began to pile up. Roberto Moreno would pull in for a stop with 9 laps to go, giving the lead back to Jourdain. After leading just 15 laps on the day, Michel Jourdain Jr. would cross the line to score the victory at the 2003 Molson Indy Montreal, taking his second win on the season and his career. Oriol Servia would come home in a distant second, with Patrick Carpentier in a mightily close third. Paul Tracy, who was running fourth, would run out of fuel in the dying breaths of the race, getting passed by Alex Tagliani and Mario Dominguez to just barely squeak across the finish line in 6th. While it wasn't a good day for him, it was worse for Bruno Junqueira, who for the second race in a row would come home in 13th. I'll be brutally honest and say that coming into this race, I was expecting it to be bad, but that was one of the best races of the season. It's the best road course race of the year for sure. We'll see if it can be one-upped in the final stretch of the season. Next up is Denver, a pretty special video that I've been looking forward to, and I hope to see you all for that video in 1 week's time. Thank you all for watching, and have a great afternoon.